I'm a master. Give me honorary doctors. All right, it's having a little fun. Hopefully, everybody is up and awake. Happy Monday, March 30th. Definitely want to go over the last um, PowerPoint that I posted for you guys with the New Deal and FDR. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm kind of just break down a few things, some things I'm going to kind of skim through. So it's kind of straightforward. So we're going to help you out here, make sure you guys understand it. I did post also the task 6 and 7. You guys should be working on that today. That kind of compares Hoover to FDR. You can kind of see the difference of the Republicans and their direction that they went, and then the Democrats in the direction that they went. And it starts to kind of give you guys some ideas of how these political parties are starting to form and why people are jumping on certain sides. So we'll get into that as we go through the PowerPoint. So let's get started. One more thing I want to mention too, don't forget to make sure you guys are journaling your day. You guys are actually living primary sources on what's going on with coronavirus. And who knows, 30 years from now, people may look back and read your information to see how did students live during this time when they were at home from school. So make sure you guys are journaling. We are going to do something with that later to create a whole package project and also get you guys some points. I am keeping track of your daily responses. I'm going to start posting some questions that will be helping your grade. Right now, I'm not doing anything that's hurting your grade. But if you're not working now, you're going to find things get difficult when we start probably later this week and next week when we do start taking grades. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming. So that being said, let me kind of quickly rush through this stuff here because only get 15 minutes on this website here. So anyway, FDR and the New Deal. 1932 presidential campaign. Basically, FDR will win over Hoover, as we talked about before. Hoover basically having the whole lazy, what's the word term I'm looking for? I'm forgetting it. Sorry. Anyway, he wanted businesses to do what they want to do. He didn't want to come in and help. And that was not working, especially with this Great Depression starting to become more and more extreme. FDR promised relief for the Poor and Public Works Project. So he had this idea of, I'm going to put people to work. I'm going to create these jobs that may not necessarily be needed at the time, but they will help overall. And so basically, he is going to win this election, and March 4th, 1933, he is inaugurated into that position. So laissez-faire was the term I was trying to look for Hoover. Laissez-faire meaning that they want the government to stay out of businesses' affairs. So sorry, I had a little brain fart, what they call that. All right, so move on here. President Roosevelt, 1933 all the way to 1945. Okay, so he's going to be our president for a very long time. Okay, up into the war. During the war, when we get to World War II, we'll talk about that. And he'll probably he's actually the last president to ever serve 3 terms, as you will see. Now you can only serve 2 terms. So a little bit of background about him as well. So he has this really warm personality, very optimistic. Used fireside chats, meaning that he used things like the radio, kind of give these speeches to get kind of push this whole nationalism feeling, getting people on board with what he was trying to do. Believe that it was the government's job to directly help people, especially at times like this, where people felt they lost their money in their bank accounts. He felt the government needed to step in. Very similar to what we're seeing today. You know, the government knows that, okay, if we're going to say you got to stay home, we're going to need to put some money out there so people are not, it's not creating some type of chaos, because people are going to be like, well, how do I feed my family if I can't go to work? So the government knows they have to step in. Very similar to this time period here, where we're seeing the government had to step in. His secret weapon is known to be Eleanor Roosevelt. She was really involved in politics. Unlike some of the other presidential wives, she was involved. She was these ears that were listening. She's giving him feedback. She's taken her role very serious, not just the wife by his side. She is definitely listening, talking to people. She's sharing those ideas with her husband. He's actually the type of man who's actually listening to her. She gives a different insight, a different perspective on what's going on. All right, his famous quote, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Okay, so this is his quote. This will live on with him. Very important quote. Closes the nation's banks for a bank holiday so that way he can reassess what do we need to do next. So we're going to go over a lot of different things that's going to happen under the new deal. I'm going to try to highlight the ones I feel you should definitely be familiar with, the ones that have long-term effects even today. So kind of in your notes, kind of highlight that. And remember, you can pause, stop this, jot down some things. If there's something that I state that's not on here, write it down if you like, or actually put a little question mark, look it up, Google it, whatever. All right, so once he closes the banks, he has what is called an Emergency Bank Act, government officials to examine each bank, determine its soundness. People began to trust their banks again. So that's the importance with the Emergency Bank Act. Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which we now call FDIC. This is still in place today. You'll see this in the window of banks, sometimes on their cards. This is where, in your reading that you guys had before, in the task, it talks about how even today, if something was to go down with the banks, you are reassured to get a certain amount of money back in your hands. I think the most you can get back up in your hand now is $100,000, but that's their insurance. Government insurance for depositor savings, and then within 1 month, 1 billion of new deposits to banks. So that begins to happen there. Scroll down so you guys can see that. All right. So moving on to the next one. The 100 days, the New Deal. So this is something you definitely need to be familiar with, the New Deal. Okay, the goals here: relief for those suffering, recovery of the depressed economy, and reform to prevent crisis in the future. So there's a whole lot of things going on. Like I said, I'm going to try to emphasize those are probably the most important. All right, so we have what is called the Alphabet Soup Agency. We have Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, employed men 18 to 25 years old, got them out working. So now they feel like I'm working towards something, I'm getting a check. This begins to, again, lift spirits, get people going, feeling like their life is going somewhere. Then we have what's called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA. Gave farmers subsidies to grow fewer crops. Why would you give them money to grow fewer crops? Well, if you are growing, let's say, thousands of bananas, but people only need 100, what's going to happen to that price? As we know, with supply and demand, the price is going to go down. Those bananas are going to cost like 2 cents because they have so many to give away. But now, if I don't even produce bananas on half of my land, this means that now there's less bananas out there. People can see that, okay, I'm going to get what I need, and the prices can stay leveled. So that way you can say, okay, bananas are 50 cents instead of 2 cents. And then farmers can continue to make a living wage, but they've already have money from the government to know that they can pay their bills. So until things get on their feet, they now are setting a stage for the next couple of years. All right, so National Industrial Recovery Act, NIRA, mandated like businesses to set prices and level production. Gave 3.3 billion of public works projects through Public Works Administration, which is called the PWA. Unions were protected by the government for the right to organize. This is pretty important too, because before the 1930s, remember, companies would kind of set up their own unions in favor of the business, not necessarily the people, try to give them some things, but not necessarily everything that the workers needed and wanted. So they could say, well, you got to work 50 hours. Hey, we'll still take care of your health care, but you're going to have to work 50 hours. Now, with the unions that the people, the workers are putting together, they can now say, no, we're only going to work what we're supposed to work, and we still get health care and things like that. So, Federal Securities Act, companies have to publicly share their financial information. This was part of the reason why the stock market crashed. Okay, basically, a lot of people didn't know what the real deal was not being posted, and so now everybody has to have all the true knowledge of what's going on in the stock market. So you can't hide anything. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So this becomes the government watchdog over the stock market. Can't go fooling people anymore. Okay, can't have people doing underhanded things with the stock market, or all of a sudden people are, they get information, they pull out information. No, everything has to be fair. So this is another important part here, Tennessee Valley Authority, so what we call the TVA. This is important. Developing the resources within the Tennessee River Valley, built dams to control floods, navigation and shipping along rivers, and provided hydroelectric power. So even though these are not necessarily things that we needed right away, these are things that's going to be helpful down the road. So if we do have floods, there is something in place. So again, this was getting people to work, giving them jobs, but also getting something done that eventually will need to be done anyway. Then we have the CWA, Civil Works Administration, employed 4 million to build highways, sewer lines, airports, etc. Now, of course, can we go on with life and apply out those things? Yeah, but this begins to get things more organized, more modern, also getting people to work. All right, so the Indian Reorganization Act, IRA, recognized tribes as key unit of social organization, limited the sale of Indian lands because many of that was being sold off, provided assistance to tribes to develop their own resources, and limited self-rule. There's a lot of tricky things when we talk about reservations, and hopefully we'll get a chance to take a look at that later on. But even if you look at a lot of reservations today, which why a lot of them seem to be poor, you'll find lots of trailers on there because in order to build on that land, they still have to get government permission. So even though it's supposed to be their land, in some ways, it's really not. So there's some little tricky things that go on with some of the laws that we have, even for reservations. All right, you have New Deal critics. I'm going to let you guys kind of go through and you can try to look at some of these different critics of the New Deal. Not everybody agreed with everything that FDR was doing. So here's Huey P. Long, senator from Louisiana. Some of the things that he actually felt he should be doing more. And then we have Father Charles Coughlin. He's a radio priest, also another critical of the nation's bankers and financial leaders, called FDR double-crossing Roosevelt, saying he was not doing enough. Dr. Francis Townsend, not doing enough for older Americans, okay, provide pensions. And then opposition in the courts, New Deal changed the basic relationship between the American people and the government. Now, this is pretty important. What happens in the New Deal is so important because we still have a lot of these things in place today. Before World War I and the Great Depression, I mean, if you were 65, you probably still had to work unless your family was, willing to take care of you. There wasn't anything in the government that jumped in and said, okay, you're going to get this for the rest of your life. That was not there. So a lot of these things that have started in the New Deal are still in place today. So that's a key important part. All right, so some other critics there. So we have the second New Deal, which takes place in 1934. I'm going to skim through this really quick here. Congress passed laws extending government oversight of banks, raised taxes on the wealthy. So you can see, again, democracy putting more taxes on the wealthy, unlike what the Republicans would do. New relief programs for struggling, Emergency Relief Appropriations Act, and then the WPA, again, employed 8 million people. This cost the country $11 billion. And there's a lot more things going on here. So important, Social Security Act. This is still in place today. People over 65 get a pension. Unemployed, if you're an employee, you get a pension. As you guys can see, a lot of stuff is going on right now where we're trying to help people who are with the coronavirus. Very similar situations here. And then the Wagner Act. I'm gonna let you guys read that part there. And then we have, I'm gonna skip a few things. Definitely read about the role of women and African Americans